Gamescom 2024. John, you and I went to a Sony display presentation where they were showing off their new gaming monitors. And we were quite impressed at the time, specifically with the OLED model that they've got. Not so much with the LCD, but I'd say it was still good for an LCD. But the OLED was looking like something truly special. And they actually sent you a sample to play with, and you're completely blown away by it, right?
Absolutely. So this is the Sony Inzone M10S OLED monitor. They say it targets esports, which I think I'll explain why I think they went with that sort of direction in a second. But essentially, this is a 480 hertz OLED monitor. This is my first hands-on experience with a monitor with a refresh rate that high. So 480 hertz, 480 frames per second, if you will. This is a gigantic number. For that reason, obviously, the monitor is a 2560 by 1440 panel, which is kind of the sweet spot, I think, for a high frame rate PC gaming. And I'm not even sure the bandwidth exists on DisplayPort for 4K 480, and let alone the GPU power to drive that. 1440, it's enough already. So I hooked this monitor up, and of course it's a 27-inch panel. So compared to the 42-inch I'm using, it's obviously going to be smaller. But bringing it right up in front of me, loading up some games, I was instantly wowed by the actual picture quality, firstly. The panel's very bright. The HDR is phenomenally good. It is better than the LG C2 I use at my desk, for sure, in that regard, which is cool. That's what I expect, though, from a high-end OLED panel. But the 480 frames per second, I actually managed to find a number of games where it's possible to hit 480 native frames per second. I was able to do it in like Doom Eternal, a lot of the old Night Dive stuff. But weirdly enough, the game that really, really impressed me the most is a 2D pixel art game, Freedom Planet 2. Now that sounds insane, right? But this is it's a side-scrolling game that actually allows really high frame rates. What makes a side-scrolling game so interesting is that the movement is entirely sort of left to right, up, down, whatever. It is not, you do not move into the scene. And as a result, this fast-scrolling action game with defined sharp pixels really shows off what this can do. Because when you're moving around the playfield at such a high speed, everything remains so crisp and clear that we finally, I would say, this is essentially like CRT quality motion clarity to my eye, but with so many more frames. It's hard to explain what it looks like, but it's one of the most mesmerizing things I've ever seen on a display. It's so smooth and so clean that there's just, it's mind-blowing. Like it's almost the kind of thing where just watching it in action put me in sort of a trance where I'm just like, I can't believe my eyes are seeing what I'm seeing kind of feeling. It was so weird. But then you play 3D shooting games, again, like Doom Eternal, for instance, and just like the sudden fluidity of movement. You know, I thought 120 frames per second, that feels great. It's really fast. But when you're up 480 frames, my goodness, it's just insane. The quality of it, it's silly at this point how fast and clear this is. And so I mentioned esports earlier. That seems to be their target. And I think the reason for that is that getting to 480 frames per second requires a beastly machine. But it is actually feasible in a lot of the popular esports games, right? You know, they're fairly low end in terms of graphics, which means that even mid to high end PCs can hit 480 frames in these sorts of games. And I am now a believer that with all the technologies they've embedded in here, and I think they worked with Fnatic as well, to help sort of design this. There's a bunch of extra features in there, including you can actually set the monitor to the quote unquote industry standard, like 24-inch size, which is apparently what
that was kind of weird, John, but we just don't know anything about
I know anything about
really.
esports. So but that is apparently the size that they use. And I've kind of learned now, like esports people, they don't want these gigantic monitors in front of them like we tend to use, right? They actually want this very focused, clear screen that this just sits right in their view, right in front of them. And that seems to be like the preferred way to play. And who am I to argue? They're way better than I am at these games, so they might be onto something. But it's true, like, you know, I entered some of these games, and being that I'm testing the monitor, instead of actually trying to shoot dudes, I was just strafing back and forth next to a wall, admiring like the clarity of the motion. Like it's like there's no motion blur here. Like it looks like real life, if you know what I mean. Like the motion is so smooth that, and there's a point where there's almost like a natural motion blur that your eyes create when you have that many frames, that it just looks unlike anything I've ever seen before. It no longer looks like a digital image frame rate. It just looks like you're looking at a real life image of something moving in the scene. That's how smooth it is. So when you combine essentially really bright, punchy HDR with this extreme motion clarity, it's basically the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in terms of digital game movement. It's that good. It's so good that it has me like, man, should I have one of these on my desk like all the time? Like, because like this is like a way that I would want to play a lot of games.
It is actually.
But what's amazing though is because it's you don't actually need to hit 480 frames to benefit from this. I found like as long as the frame rate was north of 200 and you're using G-Sync with it, which it supports, you know, the motion clarity it gets a little less good at the lower frame rates, but it's still, in a lot of games, I was still just getting this remarkably clear image, even on higher end PC games, using a 4090, mind you. So you do probably need some higher spec hardware to hit that. But I had Quake 2 RTX going at about almost 480, although with a lower, actually I got to 480 locked, but I had to lower the res quite a bit. I was like 720p something, I think, maybe lower. But it did it, and it was worth it. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 with the frame gen option, even though it's only FSR frame gen, it still got me to about 300 to 400 frames per second. And it just, again, that motion clarity, that ability to aim, when I went back to my 120 hertz OLED, it suddenly felt like playing at 30 FPS. Like your brain genuinely gets used to this in a weird way, where all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I'm corrupted now. I need these high frames. It's like the frames, they're too high. So
that's crazy.
I mean, have you guys experienced 480 hertz before like this?
No.
It's nuts.
Actually, there was a monitor. There's the new G-Sync Pulsar stuff. We did check that out. I'm not sure it was running at 480, but it was very, very good. I've just been, 480 frames per second. That's 2.083 milliseconds per frame. So yes, you're going to require like very meaty GPU and CPU to get that.
Most games can't even run at that. Like it's almost.
But this is where I feel like if NVIDIA expands on frame generation, this is a territory where like it could be like super awesome, right? Like let's say their next generation GPU drops and it's capable of generating more frames than the native internal traditionally rasterized frames. And you could actually start to get closer to getting 480 in demanding titles through frame generation. That would look like it's not just about more frames, it's about the motion clarity that it provides. And when you combine that together, you end up with something that would just be unbelievable to behold. Because again, Black Ops 6 was already giving me a lot of frames, with frame gen enabled, and it does make a big difference in terms of what you experience in terms of motion clarity. This is I feel like where PCs kind of should start going in the future, these ultra high frame rates. Even though it's really difficult to get there, we're gonna have to rely on frame gen right now. CPU limitations mean you're just getting natively 480 is really tough. Although again, hats off to id Software. Doom Eternal just like blazing at 480 frames per second. Like I know it's a 4-year-old game at this point, but my goodness, it looks really good, and it runs so fast. It's unbelievable.
Cool. I was at that presentation with you, John, and I was impressed by the display. But obviously, the ability to go hands-on with and try out your own system on it and do your own sort of content, obviously a game changer. I think the other thing that we really need to talk about is the industrial design on that monitor, because it's first class. It's really
Yes,
good.
that's another thing I want to talk about. Monitor aesthetics and physical design, I think, do matter, because it's going to be in your space the whole time. They've developed this wild stand where it's a very small circle that sits directly underneath the monitor. And the stand is designed that essentially pivots on this. So it's like the center point of the screen is where the stand is. And the arm and everything is balanced in a way that it looks like it should fall over, but it does not. It's extremely stable. The build quality, the way everything pieces together, like it's a different level compared to most other PC monitors I've dealt with. It just feels very premium, yet minimal. It's got this very clean, minimal design. I think the prior generation Inzone monitors, the first gen, were largely not very attractive looking. This one is. This one is absolutely gorgeous. And just even little things like the little tiny pin light on the side bezel of the OLED panel, that ultra thin side bezel. So there's not even like an LED light hitting you in the face. It's just a subtle little circular light on the side of the panel, which feels like it indicates what's happening with the panel in terms of signal, whether it's on or whatnot, but it's not in your face. And so it feels like all these little design decisions, the inputs on the back, the way it all comes together was just made really, really sleek and just beautiful. So it's probably the best PC monitor I've ever tested personally in terms of as a monitor. And it's the first time I look at a monitor and I say, yeah, like I could put the FW900 away and just use this instead for PC content. Which is the first time I've felt that way. Now, the FW900 still has some advantages, obviously, being a CRT. It can handle low resolutions, making it like perfect for, like, say, Xbox 360. You can and 60 hertz content. This does not solve the 60 hertz problem. If you play games on this monitor at 60 hertz, there's still gonna be persistence blur, right? That's just the reality of this. And there is unfortunately no black frame insertion to make up for it. Because I assume they're just thinking most people are aiming for higher frame rates where it matters less. It really you don't need black frame insertion when you're at these really high frame rates. It's really just for basically making 60 hertz look not blurry. That's the main usage for it, but it's not here. But otherwise, I'd say the menus are pretty good. There's enough customization options in there. It's easy to use with the little interface stick that they have on display. I mean, the whole thing, it's a really, really nice design. And if you're looking for like ultra high refresh rate and a really good OLED panel, I really can't recommend it enough if you're okay with the 27-inch size, which to me, basically I would say 27 inches is just a little too small for me as a main monitor. If there was like a 32-inch version of this, I could see myself downscaling from 42 to 32 again, just to be able to experience this.
I get what you're saying, John. I've got as my secondary monitor, in fact, directly under the camera here on the Direct, I've got the Alienware 4K 240 hertz monitor, QD OLED, and it's spectacular. But the size is kind of just right, and I could see myself using it for productivity, for gaming, for everything. But yeah, 27-inch I've tried and failed to use that. It's just a bit too small.
A bit too small.
I've just got one final note about the meeting that we had at Gamescom. Sony had one of the engineers from the engineering team there.
Yeah.
And he was really enthused and engaged with the kind of tests that you wanted to do on site,
right?
And was really happy to talk about the technical details of the display. It was quite interesting that the classic moving the mouse test the mouse pointer test
on Windows. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a basic for us, but they seem genuinely surprised that you were doing that.
That and moving windows around within Windows itself,
Yes.
right? And but like not just fast, but also kind of slow, just dragging it, looking, because there was no internet connection. I couldn't pull up the test UFOs either. So just moving those things around the screen sort of gives you an idea of what you're getting in terms of persistence blur.
Yeah.
Can
We could
Test
make a new-
UFO actually run that fast?
It does.
Is my question.
It does. I
Okay,
tested
because I was wondering if you're running on like if you start running into browser limitations, because browsers are not necessarily fast.
No, I was able to get it working on my machine. It did have that
Okay, that's
syncing thing where it would occasionally want to fall out of sync, but once it's synchronized, it was completely fine. And as expected, the little top UFO running at full speed, it was 100% clear as it moves across the image. Like you could see every little
That's
pixel
sick.
in detail.
Yeah.
Nothing was obscured when running at 480, which I feel like that's the magic point. 240 is really good, but it was still not there. But 480, if you can get there, which it's not an easy task, but if you can get there, it really is like, okay, we've got the motion clarity I've dreamt of on a flat panel. It's here and it looks awesome.
It seems to me, John, that we should be devising a new e-sport, which basically is about moving the mouse pointer and windows. That could be a real game changer for the display industry. By the sound of it.
Exactly. Yeah, because man, I think a lot of people don't think about the impact of persistence blur itself outside of, those of us that are really into this, or somebody like Mark from Blurbusters whose entire life is built on this right now. Thank you, Mark, for all your hard work. But yeah, like this is cool. I gotta say, so I'll probably do like a write-up or something on this soon when I get the chance, but I'm so impressed with this thing. And definitely would urge people to check it out. If this sounds like something you're into, I do feel strongly about this as a result. And it's fun having an FW900 and then this thing. They're both Sony monitors, split apart by more than 20 years. The FW900 still holds its own, I would say, especially with the lower resolutions and such, but it can go pretty high refresh rate. But man, the HDR combined with that extreme motion clarity, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, big props to them for that. I'll be curious to see where we're going from here and whether we'll actually, I need to do the math to see if 4K 480 is even actually possible right now. It might be. I'm not sure. With
DSC?
With display stream compression, maybe.
Over the new DisplayPort, which is only supported.
Because that's a lot. It's a lot of bandwidth.
It is a lot.
It's ridiculous.
Okay, let's move on.